Hello and welcome to episode 91 of the following Mechanical Turks project. We are guaranteed to hit 100.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't tempt fate like that. Barring significant interruption, we're guaranteed to hit 100 episodes of this.
Yeah. Gonna
That,
break
that in
off a
itself,
fresh hundo.
that in itself is some kind of accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all right. So, anywho, we're in the thick of this third product, which we've been chewing over for, I mean, a solid year, probably.
Yeah.
Which is fine because, in some sense, the labor of this is the deliberation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the method of this is chewing.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, and that's theoretically why this documentation is, or what it does, right? Because it collects this process of working toward, what actually ends up in an article, and how, as other scholars have, written about, how that product is shorn of all the convolutions that come before it, right?
Mhm. The
Definitely
art,
some. What's
the
that?
artifice, if you will.
Yeah, right. I mean, the thing itself is a kind of performance.
Yeah.
Um, but anywho, so last time, we kind of lit on this notion of, just sort of returning to my notes here,
Hmm.
about the ways, because we had shifted away from, and within recent episodes we had, a minor epiphany about, the structure of the piece we had, and identifying things as like discrete case studies,
Yeah.
uh, had some complications because, doing that brought with it the sort of interpretive framework, that, in a sense, kind of like already prejudged what they were, right? It's like, well, this is a case of deception. Now let's look at the case of deception, and see the ways in which it's deceptive. And doing the same thing with other kinds of rhetorical moves. It's a way to proceed, but we, kind of found that possibly unsatisfying because it's, in a sense, it's tautological in a way where it's like,
Right. It's the very move we're trying to avoid with the term human, and we were just risking replicating it with terms like deception or conflict or yeah.
yeah. So it's like, I don't know if like the analytical utility of those kinds of things necessarily goes away, but yeah, I mean, predetermining these as discrete codified rhetorical acts, as you say, it seems counter to the kind of moves we want to make, the kind of production we want to do. And so we were kind of searching for, then what, do we do? And, I was talking to a colleague about this. What I think we want to try and avoid, as much as this can be avoided, is, and this is a common academic move where you just deny that that's what you're doing, where it's like,
Yeah.
well, but this isn't doing that. And the further question of, well, how is it different, often ends up kind of an ambiguous, well, it's because we're moving away from that. I often find that kind of unsatisfying because it wants to reject the limitations of what it's saying you're not doing, but it's not accepting, it's like, well, how did you get out of the frying pan?
Right. Right.
So we were kind of looking for, like, so what can we do here? We were looking at instances of things and trying to, as a method, it's like, well, let's work our way into these things and see potentially um, what they show. I mean, in a sense, it's maybe not a super significant shift away from, um, well, these are discrete case studies, but it might also be a meaningful move away in that it doesn't, in advance predetermine what they are.
Right. Yeah. And I think also what clicked for me too is sort of the idea of doing with sort of theory as our method here is what we did with the first two is we found some way to inhabit the Turker system. So the idea of thinking about theory in particular, right, just the practice of theory is largely reading and writing. So what are there ways that we can then read and write about these sort of human machine merge, whatever the cabinets that we were originally interested in with the mechanical Turk, primed by the work that we did, right? So there's a sense in which the theory piece is another method of the sort of three article. I don't know why I held up four fingers. Um, but there's also a sense in which they're sort of stacking up, right? That we're now doing theory informed by the other sort of methods that we use to engage this. So having understood what we think we understand about mechanical Turks, both through sort of computational rhetoric and then also a sort of quasi
Experiment.
participatory ethnographic kind of experiment, right? Then how has that primed us as people in rhetoric to, right? I mean, again, I think that was why we made the move to like deception. It's like, oh, what does rhetoric have to add here? Well, we have this
Right.
conceptual vocabulary, which I think there's a certain sense to that, but right then we realize, are we now doing the kind of essentialist move we were trying
Right.
to avoid? And I think probably what hit me about it is it's actually just maybe to go back to your thing is we're actually not denying that we got our thumb on the scale. In fact, it's predicated upon we have unique thumbs on the scale by virtue of being in rhetoric and having done the work that we've done on this project. Now, how are we primed to engage these kinds of things? And is that a kind of, performative model
Mm.
rather than a series of ah ha ha, what you're doing there is deception. And here's what Aristotle has to say about that. It's
Right. Yeah.
how does one read an artifice rhetorically? That's, I think, what we're. So for me, the last couple of weeks have been literally my notes are just like, this is a writing challenge. Like, what's the style of this? Like, what's the, like, is this more prosaic? Is it nonfiction? Is it journalistic? Is it,
Mm.
like, what does that because it's less like what our act of reading is trying to expose, right? We're not doing the kind of transparency, like we're not writing an article so people can get to the heart of this thing we're talking about, right? That was the other, I think, risk of the
Yeah.
case study model is we're not trying to, we actually don't really care about the mechanical Turk in that sense, right? We're not doing the Edgar Allan Poe. I actually want to figure out how this works. We're actually interested in what it's generating.
Yeah.
So our reading is more the reading itself is the thing we're offering, not necessarily the conclusion or what strikes me is that's what theory does, right? Theory
Yeah.
provides a way of looking, a way of so we're
Yeah.
not sort of theorizing an object, we're doing theory in a way that we think is potentially useful. And
Useful.
so it's less what we would have to say about this particular detection system that this high school kid has found themselves using, but is the way that we read it valuable?
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Right. So then ostensibly it focuses on that process of production rather than the conclusions that spin out of it, right? Because there is yeah, I mean, because one aspect of this is, yeah, what does rhetoric have to contribute here? And if we look at our outline, it kind of explicitly addresses that. And, it points to, well, one thing is it potentially sidesteps um, the impasse, I suppose, around artifice, because we see artifice being used by kind of opposed camps, but in ways that are, they have in a kind of agreement about
Yeah,
pejorative of artifice, right? Where it's like humanists reject it for not being authentically human. Technocrats perhaps reject it for not being at this juncture completely non-human or completely itself, because it requires ongoing human intervention. Right?
right. That,
Um,
oh, I
sorry.
was going to say too, and right, and that human intervention is already, I mean, right, if you want to really unpack this, it's sort of like Well, the AI needs human text to operate. Yeah, but that human text is itself an outcome of an earlier artifice, right? Even it's you got that sort of as we I mean, I'm just going back to that conversation we had with Professor Kang, right? That the bar is always shifting, that now writing is understood as this sort of fully human activity that AI is now mimicking, ignoring the ways in which writing is itself already a technologically mediated art.
Yeah.
But
Which,
now that AI can do it, right now we've nope, now we've right, it keeps the sort of sliding scale of how we have to keep the sort of rear guard action of the human is always a kind of reactionary gesture to, technological change or new artifices. The the human's always an after the fact definition.
yeah. So that was, and that, artifice still perhaps seems to be our pathway in.
Yeah.
Um, that, it's the construction of artifice. But yeah, I mean, one way to approach that, and it's a way we didn't want to do is, well, you guys see it this way and you guys see it that way, but what we see is this, and that is in some way, if not superior, it's like, well, it's our contribution to the dialogue, which, I mean, there's probably value in doing that, but at the same time, it possibly lapses into the same kind of treatment of, well, here's our take on what this is. Um, and so yeah, we've been kind of trying to figure out like uh, how do we work with this without just, saying, even in an implicit way, the way you guys are looking at this is wrong and our way is right, and here it is, right?
Right.
Or, even it's like, here's a way to fix, because there's a rhetorical angle to this too. It's like, here's a way to fix your impasse. Think of it in this way, the kind of like prescriptive, almost stasis like, where it's like, well, here's where your breakdown is, and here's my diagnosis for a fix.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
this is more, I mean, maybe it's more akin to Casey Boyle, who we had on, wrote a piece in RSQ not long ago called I think it's called like the unbearable obliqueness of rhetoric. And so it's maybe less a kind of prescription and more like, Brian Eno's oblique strategies
hmm.
card deck. Like try this. Try, try not being afraid of the artifice.
Well, I mean, and that's an interesting point because it's like, and I don't know if there's a question we embrace or not, but it's like, what's the goal? Like, is what you want to do allow this conversation to be more nuanced or productive? I mean, in
Yeah.
which case it's like, well, then ostensibly what you're offering is this kind of like fix. And that's going to presume a lot about, it's almost teleological, where it's like, it's going to presume a lot about what productive is. Like, what is it we want? What's the problem we're seeking to solve?
Guess. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if,
If that's even an aim.
well, I think, right. I mean, again, going back to the sort of etymology of theory, right? I mean, I think maybe it's sort of a Burkean move, which is just like maybe even less. I mean, I get right. Our goal would be maybe this will be more productive, although productivity is itself an open question. But I think we could make a pretty compelling case that we think this is a way of seeing,
Okay.
and there's which I mean that's literally theoria. Um, And so, and with the assumption being, and then you might not see other stuff seeing it this way. But, maybe it's good to have more than one way of looking at something. And, we hope or wager that this one will shape the conversation in ways that attend to the the taskscape around the artifice as opposed to the sort of move towards transparency that wants to get at the essential thing there. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, that's it's less, I mean, right, that's the sort of argumentative, persuasive claim we're making is, yeah, at the end of the day, we think this is better. At some point when you're doing theory, you declare some position from which you're theorizing.
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially hedge that. Maybe this is duplicitous. I don't know, but maybe you can potentially hedge that if we're not asserting it's better, it has value that um, potentially is not at the forefront of contemporary discussions of artificial intelligence. Let's take a quick look because I know there were, it's related, but I mean, I know you were writing up some stuff and we were looking at the notion of artifice, and we already kind of touched upon it and how it often appeals to this notion of the genuine. I was just, I don't remember if I have this on notes or if I sent it to you. I've got it somewhere, but there was just a thing about a linguistics project. Did I send that to you about how they were having to shut down because they say the web has become hopelessly polluted? So
Right. I think it was
it's
even
usage
some sort of, and maybe I think you even pointed this out that this guesstimate is just that, but like half the internet now is just AI
slop.
generated. Yeah.
But, that was kind of something that, was was red meat for us because it's like, but there is no prelapsarian that has now been polluted. It's like
Right.
what there is now is what that is. And we can look at things like the kid who's compelled to write like a robot, the Delvish, where it's like contemporary usage incorporates that. It hasn't been overwhelmed by AI slop. AI slop is a major player in the
Right.
contemporary, and the
Yes.
the presumption of it was pure before is also erroneous. It wasn't pure before. There was no pure state that it's
Right.
like, well, now it's too late. The sort of lapsarian narrative, it's like, I mean, we can point to a lot of different folks who are like, there was no pure state of human, you know,
Right.
sorry, Plato. It's like the thoughts in your head are not never were wholly your own. But anywho, I just want to take a quick, share my screen here. Um, so this is from our outline, which, occasionally has updates. It probably in places it's like way behind, but like there's language here, right? So this is building on, right, the pejorative of artificial, right?
Mhm.
And then it says this is where rhetoric comes in. I want to look at this to see like, does this still hold?
Okay.
Because we do not fear the artificial. Everything partakes in artifice. So-called human intelligence is lousy with it. That's Burkean.
Yeah.
Artifice or constructs, generated situations are what we examine. And of course, we are focused on language and reading. It is not surprising that the marker of intelligence has shifted from the chessboard to the conversation. We're here for it. That is appealing to what some stuff here that comes earlier, which may or may not stick. But
Yeah.
we love the chess narrative about the machine and the man from the man and the machine,
Yeah.
talking about the chess anal beads.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's material here about how that's shifted to the LLM and things like the Turing test, where it's like, well, now the real test isn't chess because machines have mastered that. The real test is, can you fool me? Can you give human-like answers? Can you carry on? I mean, I just saw a research paper, in part put out by Apple. This was kind of interesting because it said it's really easy to reveal that LLMs can't reason, and that was kind of interesting because of the place of reason in philosophy and its status as this marker of what humans do is reason. And so like the
Yeah.
paper itself was, the presumptions of the paper itself were interesting. Of course, got a backlash of, well, we never said they could reason, they're just probabilistically assembling things. But even what do you mean by reason has never been resolved and never
Well,
will be.
I think probably because probably a pretty good working definition is the probabilistic assembly of things.
Yeah,
That,
I
but
mean,
actually, I'm actually pretty okay with that being a definition of what reason. I mean, that's right. That's it's actually Plato's Socrates is pretty compelling. He means it as an insult, but he calls rhetoric a knack because it's just a trial and error at things. I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. I'm just not sure that's a bad thing because I'm not sure what else there could be.
there was a social media post that it said, well, has anyone ever written a paper that shows that humans do the same things? That feels like a paper that needs to be written, and I'm jumping out of my fucking seat.
Yeah,
But I'm like, but it's like, well, it's a failure of our ability to participate.
yeah,
um, but it's also like, well, maybe this is, part of that dialogue. So it says this is what rhetoric brings to this dialogue: saturation and discursive artifice. That's our thing. And we don't resolve essence, at least not in any absolute sense. We're not here to determine if something is artificial or if it's intelligent. What we want to know how it is these things and what that implies. Determining ontological matters likely is impossible and wouldn't really be of much use. We'll never be able to dust our hands and say, well, that's sorted out, right? That's artificial. That's intelligent. We've got it. What good would it do? To be sure, once you label something, implications follow. Resolving that we have a war on drugs means you can act as though you are at war. But what then happens is that you push the dispute down a level. We agree it's a war, but what then should be allowed in a war? So like even if we resolve, well, that's artificial, doesn't
right.
really resolve it because it just pushes it back a level.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I wonder too if that's. I think this works for that. I mean, in many ways, it makes me think too about this language we're using here could be language we could use to make the case for how we're going to write about these examples or events,
hmm.
which is right. We're not. I can imagine someone like, oh, you're gonna talk about that kid that's writing like a robot, and then they'll get to the end of that section and be like, so did he do it or not? It's like, no, that's not what we're like. How do you? Yeah. Anyway, sorry. I mean, I think that this.
Foreground that the goal is not to resolve that, either. Well, necessarily, it's like, was this uh, an act of doing that or not? Categorization won't help us address ramifications related to labor law, ethics, so forth. What we can do to contribute then is analyze instantiations of discursive artifice. What is being constructed? Upon what ethics does it rest? What are its probable effects? How can it be differently articulated? This is rhetorical reading. What we're doing in this paper is precisely that: analyzing artifice and intelligence systems. And our method, our way in, is based in discourse, it's rhetoric. Do you think this holds, or does this need to be revised?
I think it holds. I'm even wondering too. I lost it.
Almost.
Yeah. But our method, our way is based in discourse, it's rhetoric. I mean, I wonder if rather than seeing what rhetoric has to offer is a kind of critical vocabulary, are
Hmm.
there kind of it just popped into my head. So Jim Brown, who we had on, he and I wrote a piece about the QWERTY keyboard, and we wrote it in the style of an encomium. And it just popped into my head right other. And also I was thinking too about the notion of artifice and the kind of contested nature around that too, is even something like the dissologoi as a form for thinking. Anyway, all to say, I think this holds, and in fact, it's holding because I think it's proving for me right now in inventional for the writing problem of
Well, let me ask you something wild. I mean, I'm talking academic wild,
yeah,
not not
right.
actual.
The good thing I'm sitting.
You don't want to spill your tobacco all over your desk from your pipe. You don't want
Yeah.
your monocle to come out. Um, Potentially, I mean, talking about the writing itself, would it would it be possible and valuable to do something like bring in others and write this as a give and take about this? I mean, perhaps in addition to finding people to come talk to us on camera, could we identify some folks
Yeah.
who might want to play tug of rope a little bit here?
I mean, if we're actually saying what does rhetoric have to offer, and I mean, and maybe that could be right, like agonism or dissologoi, or I'm
And
out.
potentially we wouldn't come to a resolution necessarily. I mean,
No,
potentially we could get some folks who are of the groups of the factions that we're already dismissing. I mean, we had
right.
Annette V,
That's what I was just. I mean, I'm
who's
wondering. I mean, the famous octalogs early on in. Remember those? It was in like
yeah.
maybe three C's. Like maybe it's something like that. That's wild.
I mean, potentially do it textually, potentially rather than
Yes.
like a transcription, which I think the octalogs were a transcription, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't know, whatever. But I
But
mean,
yeah.
have people, because then we could get those cases
Yeah.
and be like,
Offer those as the thing around which we gather.
yeah, yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
potentially do like rounds of, instead of like, give me your spiel on this, but potentially do like rounds of, yeah, but what about this? What about this? What about this?
yeah.
So it's not just four hermetic
That's
pieces on the same thing or whatever.
right. Right. Boy, I dig that. I mean, I dig it on those grounds, but it also would strike me as if it's the sort of third, it pulls together the thing we've been doing about this. So it
Yeah.
makes the whole thing now the method.
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
He says about his own idea. Pretty soon I'm going to be like, have
God,
you
that's really good. I think he's on to something. And by he, I mean me.
heard? Just it's me with like a fake, visibly fake mustache.
Yeah. We cut to another Zoom and it's just you looking this way and you keep putting on Groucho Marx glasses.
It's why I'm wearing the same shirt from last time.
It makes it easy to for editing purposes. It's like it's why people on the Great British Baking Show are wearing the same outfit both days.
No, it's just the two ones that occur on the first day.
Uh-huh.
Do the hosts wear the? Oh my God, you just blew my mind.
Sorry.
Well,
I just Berenstein Bears the Great British Baking Show to you.
we as a family watch an episode basically
Yep.
every night.
Yep. That's what
Fortunately,
we
one of
ran out. There's a pottery making show that scratches the same itch
okay.
where they've got two judges and people come in and make pottery.
We watched one episode of a painting one, I believe,
Mm.
where it was like a painting contest. It didn't. It was methadone. It didn't
Yeah.
do the same job.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, I think methadone that's an app. So this one was pretty good methadone.
What's okay? I can find it.
And
Pottery.
they've got, the sort of male judge who's a little rotund and he's pretty harsh. But instead of shaking your hand, he weeps about the shape of the pottery. It's so if you get him to weep, then that's the handshake.
I don't want to kibosh this, but let me tell you why it's
Okay.
tough. Well, because Deanna is an accomplished and longtime baker,
Oh, so
and Charlie is a nascent baker. So
uh-huh.
it's not just the protocol; it's also, the subject matter itself is deeply entwined.
Nice. So
And in
it's
fact, we've tried some things from the
yeah.
show.
Well, you've been a staunch opponent of soggy bottoms as long as I've known you.
Mm, contextually. Well, anywho, uh,
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it's an interesting idea. Uh,
Yeah.
it
So
it brings with it the complexities of multi-authored pieces in terms of,
yeah, but
temporal demands and but
we've already built an infrastructure for it, at least conceptually, and there's no, I mean, and by that I mean, this is like we're cooking this thing slow and low.
yeah, right. There's
But
no rush.
maybe what we would need though is we'd need some germ of a thing, right? So maybe like our own readings of it or readings of multiple things that we would then sort of put into play. But yeah, maybe going back through our guests and then also I think finding some new folks too could be, yeah, that's got legs.
That's why I'm here. Maybe I should just go on a high note.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or even swing for the fences a little bit. Well, I mean, a lot of our guests are swinging for me, swinging for the fences, but
Yeah. No. There is a compelling logic to it too in terms of the overall project that that if it's building towards a sort of third theoretical piece and our the conceptual work we've done is that we think rhetoric offers a way of reading this.
let's prove it.
Yeah. And we
Let's
can't
do
do
it.
that by ourselves, nor should we. And maybe we could structure it in a way that they're all, you know, they don't have to be symmetrically involved. But once we got people that were game, we could come up with some kind of maybe even like protocols, the word,
Yeah.
which they might also appreciate because like, okay, here's
Everybody
the
wants rules.
here's the kind of time frame, here's what the expectations are,
Yeah.
and we kind of run it like an experiment, like it's another experiment. It's an experiment in getting a diverse group of people to sort of theorize
Or
from
it's
this.
an iteration of what we've said we've been doing all along.
Yeah,
Because, even some of our feedback on other products scratched at it's like, well, how did you parse this up? And,
yeah,
make some of those nuts and bolts. And, in part of our explication of that was like, well, some of that's happening in other formats like this, where it's like, this is how the sausage is getting made. So, in a sense, it's like it didn't have to be in the piece where it's a visible, handoff or whatever. But,
right.
there may be an argument for, well, do it in you haven't done it before, do it in this product.
Yeah. I mean, so partially I'm thinking I mean, the reason that jumps out at me is there's a book out called Rhetorical Climatology, and it's by they call it by a reading group, and I think it's five folks. Um, and so they each ostensibly wrote chapters, but then there are inter chapters where the person who just wrote the chapter writes an inner chapter with the person who's then writing the next chapter. But what's also interesting about it is they've got I forget what they called it. They look like footnotes, but they're the other members of the reading group commenting on the chapters as footnotes across the bottom. Um, anyway, so there's also a way that we could sort of think about this both as sort of interlocking responses, but maybe also given the logic of this project in Manifold, maybe a lot of these then appear as rather than like direct response after response, it's a series of things that are maybe somewhat hermetically sealed pieces, right? Because it may be logistically
Yeah.
that's how it has to work. But then there's this that the annotations themselves are also being
Rogerian, here's what I hear you saying and what I think about it.
right, right. Or contests, or maybe just like actually, I took this the exact opposite way,
Well, see,
and
that
then
would be
elaborates on that.
interesting
So
because,
that so
like,
it proceeds through annotation.
we've been mentioning some folks that we've talked to before, like, because I remember on the previous piece, Ben, who was super helpful and may have a much more kind of like, I don't know, I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth, but like a much more kind of what we're calling technocratic orientation to this, where it's like, well, here is how I see artificial intelligence operating in this space, you know?
Yeah. So the idea being is that maybe not everybody that would participate would necessarily be in rhetoric or identify as a rhetoric person.
You know, I
So we
mean,
could also make the claim that rhetoric offers both rhetoricians and the conditions for rhetoric.
well, because, as an option, it's like it gets it outside of just the discipline talking to the discipline.
Yeah.
And big surprise, we find value in that. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, the fix is in. That's why we're here.
Well, and thinking practically too, right? It brings in so people in rhetoric can hear from people outside rhetoric and
Vice
bringing
versa.
people and then vice versa, right? So Ben is involved and digs it and likes it and then brings it with him, right? Or so that could be
And I'm saying him, but if not him, someone in a
right,
similar line of
right.
study, similar focus.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's an idea.
it is an idea.
It may move us forward in terms also of words on the page because, it's not like we've been doing nothing with this, but like in terms of producing a draft, we've
Yeah,
been chewing away for a while.
yeah.
What's on your shirt?
It's so this was says so,
I know exactly what it is.
yeah. Okay.
You can explain to the viewing audience that that comes from a podcast that, yeah,
Yeah. How did this get made? Where Stellan Skarsgård was in a movie, and at one point he was referred to as Stellar Skateboard, and then there was eventually his Wikipedia page was
right.
closed because people kept changing his name
People
to
from that podcast audience.
yeah, kept referring to him as Stellar Skateboard. So I'm glad I've on two occasions I've worn this out and have found people that noticed it as well, and it was at that point you'd be like, I understand at least implicitly what it's like being in a cult. It was this like immediate, unquestioned acknowledgement that we were,
But it can
uh,
be subtle, just a head nod. I know what
yeah.
that.
But one was a bartender who had it as he got it as a tank top, and then he basically said, I grew out of it in terms of its gut. I said, yeah, I'm pushing
Oh,
this one too.
because there's two ways that could go. It's like, no, I'm so yoked, I can't
Yeah,
strap
yeah,
this
yeah.
on.
Yeah, similar to the when people kept changing Ron Silver to Ron Silva, actor activist Ron Silva on his
All right.
Wikipedia page. Yeah. No, this is one of my prized possessions.
Um, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I think with that how did this get made plug, we can probably
Well, so I mean, it's worth talking about what you want to talk about at the beginning. The reason why we hit record because I was like, well, wait, let's record this. I mean, we touched upon it, right? I mean, because like if we want to talk, we're gonna have to have something to talk about.
yeah,
We could do something like this scenario that we've been hovering around in terms of because it's larger than just the kid. It's just the
right.
kid is this kind of noticeable thing that gets into these
Well, I think
larger.
there's potentially kind of I was kind of thinking about like, it would bring up so if you move so following the move of the piece, right, there's the kind of original move to the sort of, trying to open up the box and try to figure out what the thing is doing. And then there's the move to kind of experiment with it. And then there's the move to talk about the impact. So, like at each, imagine now you bring in someone that would be interested in, right? So, let's say we bring on, I'm just thinking of people that we've had on, right? We bring back Scott Graham or maybe Annette who have more, I think, technical know how, right? That would potentially pull at that part of it. And then the kind of experimenting with it would maybe be someone like Casey. Um, and then you get into maybe like the pedagogical aspect of it. And I'm thinking of Antonio Bird, who we've not had on, but wrote some, I think, pieces about LLMs that we've pulled from. And then also getting into, I think what's also noticeable there, but the person doesn't even talk about, right, is the power dynamic of the classroom, right? So in part, what's forcing the kid to write like a robot isn't just AI in general or the detection tool. It's also a teacher using the
Yeah.
detection tool, right? And so then you could potentially have someone that's what they would their sort of theoretical perspective would zero in on the power dynamics that are shaping that artifice, right? The idea that it's a teacher using a detection tool to detect a student's behavior. So part of what's shaping that student's behavior isn't just the tool, it's the tool in the artifice of a pedagogical and a pedagogy that's largely working in a kind of detect and punish
Yeah.
model.
I mean, it's a larger systemic thing of education. I mean,
Right. So that's
this is
so
a
that's now
conversation.
that's now what attention to artifice gets you. Right now, there's these right rather than trying to. I mean, in many ways, I'm it's sort of the Latourian instinct, right? That the critic adds, the critic
Yeah.
doesn't subtract, right? So part of my instinct about transparency, right, is I just don't think it's possible. I think it's potentially foolish to do it and maybe even harmful to do it because you're going to ignore these things. But also, I think good critics add, right? No, there's this story in front of us, and there's rather than one thing we all try to get to the bottom of, there's all these other things that now this story allows us to engage and talk about.
Yeah. I mean, there's a Latourian move there of, tracing these things without, I mean, it's Aramis.
Yeah. Yeah. Which probably got me, I mean, partially probably why I've been thinking a lot about how do you actually go about writing this? And Latour's whole thing too with Arame is like, this is the way I figured out how to.
Is that
I
how
did
that's pronounced?
Arame or Arame. I think it's Arame, but
Okay. So I've been pronouncing it wrong forever.
I don't think I assume it's French. So
It's
you just
French, of course. Yeah.
as many of the consonants as possible while still uttering something that is recognizably a word. Um, but right, like it's not as if he decided I want to write a piece of scientific fiction. It's like, no, I kept trying to write this report about this train, and it led to me right. I had to sort of invent this way of writing to try to avoid the binary that was going to ultimately end up shaping this report, which is it either wasn't going to work technically or it wasn't politically feasible. And the tour's like, I think that's a bad choice. So I've got to figure out a way to write it that doesn't lead me to either of those conclusions. So I got to make the train a character, and the train's going to quote Frankenstein. But that was him solving a methodological problem, right? Not just I want to write this weird thing and then right. So for him, that I mean that's his constant writing, right? That for the vast majority of the social sciences, the writing of in the hard sciences, right? The report is writing up the experiment that you did. In the social science and the humanities, the report is the experiment.
Yeah.
It's not writing up something that took place elsewhere. When you're writing a sociological account, you're not writing up an experiment you did. That thing is itself the experiment. So, which means Latour is always talking about writing. I think that's why he's probably at least amenable to rhetoric. It's not just, I think, his general sense that persuasion operates in these realms. It's yeah.
Amenable to rhetoric, not to me in particular, given that interview where
Yeah.
he pointed out,
Yeah.
I'm the man who Latour called a dumbass. Not
Oh,
literally.
I can't wait to give your eulogy.
It's my claim to fame.
Yeah.
I'm the man Latour said doesn't read well.
No one's perfect. And by that I mean Latour for not recognizing your genius.
All right. Well, okay. So yeah, I mean, that might be something,
Yeah.
organize this kind of scenario, I mean, it's interesting because it's hard to, I mean, it's part of it where it's like, well, here's the circle, here's the thing that the object I want you to look at. But it's like we can work our way into like this sort of scenario without overly bracketing it off,
No.
potentially figure out, ways
Yeah.
ways to rhetoric ourselves into it as a collective.
So here's a thought. We've got a guest next time. I wonder if so when what I figured I would send some, talking points, but maybe one of the talking points is actually
What do
here's
you think
this.
of this?
I mean, on it, like, here's this news story that we shared a couple episodes ago. We've been talking about it. An idea we had on the last episode is this. Maybe for part of our conversation, riff on this. What jumps out to you
Yeah.
about this?
And I can send you some notes I have because it points to, as is my way, it points to a lot of URLs where it's like,
I
here are things about this story and related to it.
Yeah, and maybe too, that's part of what this mode would be is rather than like we've got this discrete thing we want you to respond to, is that every reader is going to add their own citations to it. And so,
That was part as I was like, here's this, but like do your own research, as in,
well, that
tap
this
this into, broader things.
yeah. So in other words, we won't end up with like eight perspectives on the same thing. We're going to end up with eight different things,
Yeah.
right? Eight different versions of this artifice. Because the artifice, right? I mean, as we pointed out in our early piece, like the artifice itself is porous, right? It's contaminated. It's right. So I mean, again, in a kind of Latourian move, the moment you decide to follow this artifice, you're now part of what's constructing that artifice.
Right.
So it's not even that rhetoric is good at talking about artifices. Rhetoric is actually good at making them, not just describing them, which I
Here
think
it
is one
is.
more reason to create maybe this sort of collaborative, right? I mean, to a certain extent, right? We need rhetorical Turkers. We're going to give them a human intelligence task.
Yeah, let's jot that down. Write that down.
That's gold, Jerry.
To God, all things are possible. So write that down. Let's see. We need Oracle Turkers.
Yeah.
This is us posing a kind of human intelligence task. Now, the big question is, how are we going to work this butt plug into this?
That's so well done.
Well, we'll figure it out. We always do.
I think the sort of the yeah, well there I think it's there. We were talking. I said we can now for sure open with the cheating scandal. But I think right just the right the even that because that would be another example, right? The immediate move of like there must be a discrete object inside this kid pulling the strings. It's like that ultimately I think we're reasonably sure that cheating accusation was false, but it wasn't wrong.
Well,
In
and
so,
it's
insofar as, right, I mean, all the stuff we talked about earlier, right? The way that people who play chess and even poker, right, they are constantly training against computers. So there's a sense in which they're already enrolled in it. That essentially
well, and trace it to artifice. It's
right,
never
what
been
does
without
that
artifice.
right, what does that accusation reveal
Mm.
about the people's thinking about chess in that moment?
And about the artificial.
Yeah,
I mean, you're being artificially enhanced, which necessarily means you have anal beads, not you've been training with a chess computer your whole life. It's like,
because
what's
those
the line of artifice, right?
right because
It's skin bag.
yeah, it's much the accusation is much cleaner if it's one discrete object inserted into another one, as
Right.
opposed to the 25 years this kid has been playing.
artificially enhanced.
Right, right.
Like that parrot, right? I mean,
Yes.
the artifice was the guy training the parrot.
Right. Like people forget, like the parrots can talk. No, parrots in this particular artificial relationship with the human teacher can talk. Right. The parrot's capacity for whatever it did wasn't there. It got it got artificed.
I was just quickly showing this was the thing I'm talking about. And the language is literally generative AI has polluted the data.
Yeah.
Project analyzing human language shuts down because it's been polluted.
Right.
Oh,
As
I got
if
some bad news.
as if human language hasn't already been described as a virus.
I got some
Right.
bad news about pollution. We've always been polluted.
Yeah. No, there's still that. Was it Ted Underwood wrote like a blog poster basically like large language models are just like the addendum to all of it is essentially the post-structuralists were right.
We may have already brought that up. That
Yeah, I feel like it probably came up and I mean the whole question of polluted and right like language is it already an art. I like just get onion like it's you're not if you don't talk to kids, they don't start talking. Like Mowgli doesn't come out of the jungle speaking.
yeah.
It's an artifice to which you gain access, and that artifice then starts to shape you. It's
All right. Well, we're at the hour-ish
uh,
mark here, and I do have another appointment.
I have to run to Michael's to get crafting supplies for my writing class because that's where I'm at professionally.
I've got a series of meetings. Uh,
Ooh, got
all
any
right.
lead?
Well, but this was productive. This
There's
did
always there's a lot of
well.
repetition, but there is iteration.
And the repetition isn't bad if it goes somewhere
I think
else,
we
right?
got we have there's more things to keep thinking about.
All
We're
right.
we're for sure going to get to 100.
Yeah, that's true. Don't
And that
jinx it. Gonna
yeah,
get hit by a bus, but
God damn it. I know, right?
like,
The only way this doesn't happen is if one of us, this is now a taunting.
yeah,
Okay, well,
I'm not superstitious, but I'm some stitious. It's Michael Scott.
yeah,
Uh,
I'm superstitious.
all right, so I'll send you some of those things I
Yeah,
have
send me
about
some
that
shit, and then
scenario.
I'll prime our guest.
All
We'll run
righty.
an experiment.
All right, I will talk to you soon.
All right.